In episode 2, Marnes is wondering what exactly happened between Holston and Juliet, because in his opinion, it seemed like after the two met, that's when Holston's whole mood changed. And it's partly true. Because shortly after Allison had showed George what was on that file, he got really excited. That was the breakthrough he was looking for. George, coincidentally, had been dating Juliet. Now, it wasn't a sanctioned relationship, so they had to kind of keep it hush-hush. But because they were dating, Juliet knew that George liked to dabble in artifacts and also was searching for something. Although he wouldn't explain what it was, and he just told her, when I find it, I'll know. Now, because they weren't sanctioned, they usually wouldn't hang out together publicly. But one day, all the engineers are having a party because Juliet is getting an apprentice. George showed up, and it was a surprise, but she let him know that everybody in the down deep, which is basically what they call the bottom of the silo, everybody down there knew, and nobody cared. He still didn't want to show too much affection. He just let her know that he got something big, and he didn't want to reveal what it was right then and there, so he said he would tell her later that night at her place. But when she got off work and she went to her place, George wasn't waiting for her, although he was there because there was a package waiting for her. When she opened it up, it was a very old Pez dispenser. Nothing inside, just a dispenser. And then there was a note that said, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this? I found what I was looking for." Juliet figured that she would just talk to George about it the next day. But when she woke up, she found out that George had committed suicide, falling over the balcony to his death, and it rocked her to her core. She knew that George didn't actually kill himself. He showed no signs, and plus, he clearly wanted to tell her what he found, so this made no sense at all. She went to the police officer in the down deep, a guy named Hank, and she told him that George did not kill himself. Hank knew that George and Juliet were seeing each other, and he kind of just figured that maybe Juliet was being a little bit reactionary to this because she was a little too close to it. And because of this, he tried to explain to her that there's got to be a thing as motive and reason, and she just didn't have any proof. And the bigger issue is, because they were in an unsanctioned relationship, she couldn't even really voice any concerns. But she got really frustrated, and finally, Hank agreed that he would send it up top to the sheriff, who he called an upstanding guy, and he would voice it as a fellow coworker voicing concern. The next day is when Holston and Marnes showed up and met Juliet for the first time. They went to the scene of the crime, or the suicide, whichever way you look at it. And Juliet is definitely uncomfortable because she doesn't want to let on too much. But she tells both the police officers that George did not kill himself. It just made no sense. And they, just like Hank, tried to explain that it does look like suicide. And sometimes people just hide their emotion and their pain really, really well. But that's actually something that Juliet knows all too well, because both her little brother and her mother committed suicide, and she's the one who found the body. So she knows something about this kind of tragedy, and she was convinced that George didn't fit the criteria. Holston and Juliet then go to the coroner to check George's body for any signs of a fight, a skirmish, anything that could point to this actually being a murder. But they don't find anything. That includes any sign of a previous attempted suicide. So it's not like Holston completely dismissed Juliet's theory. Hank and Marnes then walk into the room and let Holston know that judicial's on their way. They're going to want a briefing on everything that happened. Holston nods and then sends them off to go see if anybody was on the stairs or anybody knows anything about why George wanted to jump or anything that might have happened. He and Juliet then go to have a private conversation, just the two of them. He tells her that he's aware of the fact that the two are in a relationship. He's not going to tell on them, but he does wonder why the two never got sanctioned. She doesn't answer the question. She does, however, say that George left something for her. It is a relic, and it does mean he's going to have to confiscate it, but he promises not to tell Judicial where he found it. So before he does have that breakdown with Judicial, he goes to Juliet's apartment, and she shows him the Pez dispenser and then half of the note. She shows him the half that says, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this." She then takes Holston to where that was, and it's a part of the silo that he's never been before, and he doesn't even know exists. Deep in the down deep, there's a sign that says, "Do not proceed beyond this point. It is a punishable violation of the pact." But when you take that sign off, there's a tiny little hole in the wall. That leads to a tunnel that has graffiti written all over it, and Juliet's pretty sure it's pre-rebellion. But that's not what she wanted to show him. No, it's deeper in the silo. There's a hole in the floor that leads to a makeshift ladder, and when they climb down the ladder, Juliet flips some lights, and they are in a giant cave with a monstrous contraption below. Juliet figures it's what created the silo. The founders dug this deep hole, and instead of pulling the machine out, which would have been too difficult, they just threw 30 feet of concrete over it. Below the machine is just nothing but water. And she has no idea what is below that water, and she doesn't want to know what's below that water. George had seen drawings of a door, and he always was looking for it, but to Juliet's knowledge, she doesn't know if he ever found it. All of this is blowing Holston's mind, because he's lived his entire life in the silo, and none of what he's seeing has ever been discussed. And after all, he is the sheriff. Juliet then takes him lower to a little tiny platform that George kind of carved out as his own nook. He's got some shelves, a bed, some essentials, but she pulls out a box and tells Holston the last time that she saw the Pez dispenser was in that box. But all that's in there are just some old relics. One of the relics in the box, though, is something she's never seen before. It looks like an old camcorder, but they're not sure what it is or even how to work it. She then, however, notices that there was a wire that was tied to the spool, but the spool is empty. And then she starts following the wire, and it leads her to what George found. The drive that Allison had unlocked, and then directions on how to unlock it. At the time, though, neither Holston nor Juliet had any idea what they had in their hands. All they knew was that George did an awful lot to keep this hidden. After all, only he and Juliet even knew the place existed, to their knowledge, although Juliet guesses that maybe some higher-ups know about its existence. Either way, George took painstaking labor to make sure nobody would find it. One thing, though, catches Holston's eye. It's the fact that on the back of the printout on how to recover deleted files is his wife's handwriting. This sparks a little bit of an argument between Juliet and Holston. Holston admits that George and Juliet knew each other. And when he admits that, Juliet gets really angry. Because she starts thinking that the only reason that Holston came down there was because he wants to figure out if George had anything to do with Allison going out, cleaning. He completely deflects, telling her he's going to have to give Judicial all of this contraband. And she doesn't want him to do that. She wants Holston to go find George's murderer. It gets pretty uncomfortable between the two. Juliet at one point saying maybe if you listen to your wife, she wouldn't have gone out to clean. When cooler heads eventually do prevail, he promises Juliet that he will look into what happened to George, but in the meantime, she's going to have to be quiet, not draw any attention to herself whatsoever. He promised her that when he found something, he would send word. It would be a signal and she would know what it meant. So he went up to go have that meeting with Judicial, and weeks later, Juliet still hadn't heard anything until all of a sudden she heard that he was going out to clean. Just like with the cleaning 3 years ago, this is big news in the silo. Everybody gets around. Everybody's watching it. And in the down deep, Juliet is watching it amongst her peers, and they see Holston go out. They see Holston clean, and they see Holston try to make his way to Allison's body, which is still there. But then he does something completely shocking. He tries to take his helmet off, which they've never seen before. And that's because what they don't know and what they don't see is that when Holston got out there, it was just as Allison had predicted. It was green. He actually says to himself, "Oh my God, she was right." And while in the silo they could see Allison's body, outside, she wasn't there. There was no body. There was just green grass. After a little bit outside, Holston started having problems breathing, so that's why he took off his helmet. And as to whether or not he actually collapsed, we don't know. But as soon as he did collapse, Juliet got so pissed off, she just started screaming, "He's a liar," and she stormed out. Juliet got so mad that she went to the only person she felt comfortable talking to, a woman named Martha. Martha fixed up old tech, old appliances, but she had kind of been a mother figure to Juliet ever since the age of 13. She knew that deep in that rough exterior, there was still a hurt little girl who found her brother and her mother dead, and Martha felt for her. Juliet tells Martha everything that happened with Holston, and she's infuriated because she waited and never heard anything, and now Holston's dead, and she might never know what happened to George. After talking to Martha, Juliet decided to do some investigating of her own. She went down to that little nook that George had carved out for himself, and even though she was terrified of water, she decided to grab some rope and go searching if she could find what George was talking about. Maybe she could locate a door. But right before she hits the water, she drops her flashlight, and she's pretty terrified. Now, way up, and I'm talking 100 floors up, in the silo, Marnes meets with the mayor. The mayor is completely stressed out, because without a sheriff, she's worried about order turning to chaos. She tells Marnes that she looked through all the old ledgers of the previous mayors, and there's not one instance of a sheriff being sent out to clean. And what really is concerning to her is she has no idea how the rebellion started. So for all she knows, the rebellion started because a sheriff was sent out to clean, and without a sheriff, chaos ensued. So it's of the utmost importance that they get a sheriff and get one right away. Now with Holston, he was named sheriff by the previous sheriff. That guy just retired and said Holston will be the sheriff, and it was done. She thought that Marnes would be perfect for the job, but he tells her, I'm retiring. It won't be me. So Judicial sends their candidates. They send 3 dummy candidates that are horrible with the actual candidate they want mixed in. It's a guy named Paul Billings. He was in the police force, but he left to go work for Judicial. So this is a way for Judicial to have a puppet as their sheriff. Marnes tells the mayor that he's not the worst candidate, but he's certainly not the best. And the mayor just says aloud how she wishes that Holston were to just name a successor. And that's when Marnes reluctantly tells her he did. He shows her a note that Holston left for him, and it names Juliet Nichols as the new sheriff. Marnes was reluctant to tell the mayor because naming an engineer the sheriff made no sense. And to Marnes, it was just more proof that Holston had kind of lost his way. But the mayor tells Marnes that she'll go and meet with Juliet. Maybe she'll be able to see what Holston saw in her. So the next day, they're planning on going to meet with their possible new sheriff, not realizing that she is as far down as you can get in the silo, hanging above a bunch of water. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.